Hello everyone, I'm Gigi and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from Denzel Curry, ZUU. I wasn't really expecting a new album from Denzel Curry this soon, considering he just dropped his last studio album, Taboo, in July of last year. Hasn't even been a full year since that project dropped and I already have the follow-up. However, given the success of that record, with how many people seem to really like it, myself included, and the success of his cover of Rage Against the Machine's Bulls on Parade earlier this year, I could see it making sense for him to want to release a follow-up as soon as he did here, to, ride on the success of those two things that he dropped previously. I was very curious to see what the overall sound and quality of this record was going to be like after listening to it, and once again on this thing, Denzel Curry is changing things up with his sound and trying something new. Whereas Taboo was a pretty dark project overall, which featured many different styles of tracks being present on it, as well as the three-act structure. This project is a lot more simple, a lot more stripped back, and a lot more to the point with its presentation. And overall, the sound of this thing is essentially just a collection of straightforward, banging trap rap songs that have a lot of energy to them and are very inspired by Miami. This project is definitely a lot more simple than Taboo or any of the previous material that Denzel has released in the past. And while for a lot of artists out there, whenever they decide to drop a project like this that's just a lot more straightforward and to the point, just a collection of trap bangers or something like that, I tend to not care for it that much. However, with this project, that wasn't really the case, as I found myself liking this project quite a bit. In fact, while I don't think it's as good as Taboo or even Imperial, I think that this is still, generally speaking, on a very general level, pretty equal in quality to those two projects, but in a very different way, of course. Comparing this to either of those two albums is a bit difficult to do because this thing is going for something completely different than what those two projects tried to do respectively. Like I said before, all the tracks on this thing share some pretty similar qualities. For the most part, they're all really straightforward and to the point trap bangers. However, there is some diversity in the track listing here. It's not like you're getting the same track over and over and over again with each song here. For example, you got some cuts on this thing that feel a bit more upbeat overall, a bit more happy, and a bit more summery as well. For example, tracks like Wish, or even the opening title track to this thing, just feel a bit more upbeat overall compared to maybe some of the darker moments and some of the more aggressive moments on this thing. When it comes to some of the more aggressive cuts on this album, tracks like the closing song to this thing are standouts for obvious reasons. This closing track on here reminds me a lot of some of the songs that popped up in the third act of Taboo, with just how aggressive and in your face it could be. However, at the same time, it's not as dark lyrically, I'd say, though there is still some dark tendencies that do pop up in the lyrics throughout this project. You will have some passing references to things like violence and death throughout this project. However, for the most part, the lyrics on here are not as dark, and they're not as deep overall as a project like Taboo or Imperial, for example. For the most part, the lyrics on this thing try to match the overall tone of the project, which is just pretty much straight up fun. Miami not only plays a big part in the overall vibe and sound of this project, but also the lyrics too, as throughout this project, there's various moments where there's references made to the city, or even on tracks like Ricky, for example, which doesn't necessarily talk about Miami in detail or anything quite like that. However, it tells a story of Denzel growing up in the city, his family, how they've influenced him. Really, what I'm trying to get at here is that throughout this project, Denzel Curry is, in a way, trying to paint a picture of the city and what it's like and how it's affected him. Not only through the lyrics on this thing, but also the sound as well. The production throughout this album is pretty great. You have a variety of different styles of trap bangers, whether it be more upbeat sounding cuts like Wish, or maybe some colder sounding instrumentals like on the track Automatic, and some more aggressive ones like on the track Birds, for example, which also features a pretty nice Rick Ross feature that I did not expect to be as good as it was, but overall he does have really nice chemistry here with Denzel on this track. As for Denzel's flows themselves, they're pretty great overall. They have a lot of energy and charisma to them. You have a lot of nice variety in terms of the flows that you get on this thing, and overall this delivery is really what helps sell this project for the most part, along with the really great production here. Even if the lyrics throughout this project aren't necessarily super deep and introspective or anything, the way that they're delivered with as much energy and charisma as they are is really what helps sell this project. I also really like a lot of the hooks that are present here on this project. They're all really catchy, they all get stuck in your head really easily, and I think that they add a lot to these tracks and make them stand out even more and make them even more memorable than they already are, and definitely add a further poppier edge to them that I think just works with the very straightforward approach that a lot of these tracks are going for here on this project. I also think all the performances on these hooks are really solid as well. They're all really nicely sung. So yeah, overall the hooks on this project are another aspect that I enjoy quite a bit. Another aspect of this album that I quite respect overall is its runtime. It's just a little under 30 minutes in length, so it's definitely a really short album. However, I think given the very straightforward approach to a lot of the tracks on this thing, this project overall is all the better for its really short runtime, as it never has a chance to get redundant or boring or repetitive or anything like that. Despite the fact that a lot of the cuts on this thing are really simple in nature, they're very to the point and simple sounding, they never have a chance to become redundant or boring or repetitive. Of course, the high energy to a lot of these tracks also helps with this, but yeah, the really short runtime to this project just makes sure that this project doesn't go on too long and start to get boring. While I quite like the majority of this album, there are some aspects that I don't really care for as much. Probably the biggest part of this project I'm not the biggest fan of is the skits that pop up on this thing. They're just not super interesting skits. On the first listen, they are, somewhat entertaining, but with repeated listens, they did start to wear on me a bit. And overall, given the really straightforward, banging approach to this project, the fact that it does occasionally get interrupted by some skits is kind of annoying, especially with repeated listens. And the fact that all the skits are kind of put towards the end of this project, for some reason, does make the second part of the album a bit weaker overall compared to the first. You also have the Bushy Beat interlude in the second half of the album, which isn't a bad track or anything, but it's just so short overall and not as interesting as everything else that it kind of stands out as a notably weak track on this thing. Not a bad one by any means, but yeah, like I said, definitely the weakest cut here. So overall, I enjoyed ZUU quite a lot despite some minor complaints I did have with the project. Overall, one thing I really like about this project is that, despite the fact that it is a really simple, straightforward, banging trap album, it knows that it is that, and it's trying its best to do that as best as it can possibly be. There's tons of trap albums out there that try to do stuff like this, I feel, but don't quite get it right either because they don't have the energy, or the charisma, or the flows, or the beat selection to really make it all work. But on ZUU, it's all really there, and I think it's what makes this project really enjoyable for me at the end of the day. It's just such a fun listen, and despite the couple of skits that do pop up and kind of ruin the flow of this project, it's consistently a really fun listen for the most part. Like I said before, it's certainly not as deep or introspective or complex a project as Taboo was, and if you walk into this album expecting another Taboo, I can understand why you'd be disappointed, but at the same time, this project is clearly not setting out to be another Taboo or anything quite like that. It's setting out to be a collection of really fun, straightforward, banging trap songs heavily inspired by Miami. And, going for that sound, it definitely succeeds in doing so. And it manages to be really fun in the process. So, yeah, I definitely would have to recommend this project. I quite enjoyed it. Overall, another solid project from Denzel Curry, at least in my own personal opinion. But it is just my own personal opinion, so if you happen to disagree, that is perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave out your own opinion in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. If you enjoy that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.